On October 23rd, 1969, a child came into the world and straight into a life raging with difficulty. Christina Boyer's mother was a drug addict, and when she found herself suddenly responsible for another fragile human life, she decided that she couldn't take care of it. When she was just a baby, the Franklin County Children's Services removed Christina from her family home and sent her to live with John and Joan Resch. By that point, John and Joan were experienced foster parents. They were established within the community and became a home for over 250 children in need throughout the years. At one point, they even had 6 foster children living with them at once. Christina was only about 2 years old when she moved into their busy but strict household. As she grew, she came to view the Resches as her own family and started going by the name Tina Resch. But tragedy was not far on the horizon. When Tina was only 12 years old, one of her older foster brothers began molesting her. Like many victims, especially when they're children, it took a while for Christina to find the courage to confide in the people that she saw as her parents. But what she says happened then was anything but the reaction a loving foster family would provide. Finally, I did tell them, but they didn't believe me and slapped my face. Christina later said, and the trust between them all was broken. Only 2 years later, Christina began talking about another strange and unnatural experience that she was having. Experiences that she described as something like telekinesis. According to Christina, whenever she got angry, upset, or had big emotions, objects around her would start moving on their own. It was possible, Christina thought, that she had the supernatural ability to move things with her mind. Or it was possible there was something else going on entirely. An astonishing number of people believed Christina and believed that she had this gift. As the word got out, the media, parapsychologists, and paranormal investigators arrived by the dozens, all for their chance to examine the Columbus Poltergeist Kid. She was even featured on the popular TV show Unsolved Mysteries.
You're about to meet a young woman with an extraordinary story to tell. Her name is Tina Resch. When Tina was just 14 years old, she found herself at the center of a frightening vortex, where objects moved of their own accord, and ordinary household appliances took on a life of their own. Were poltergeists to blame? Demonic possession? Or was it all an elaborate hoax? At least one noted parapsychologist believes the truth lies elsewhere, in the mysterious power of the mind.
I did say poltergeist because it was now mostly accepted that Christina was haunted by a poltergeist, who was in turn reacting to her anger and frustration by moving inanimate objects around her. One parapsychologist and his assistant believed in Christina so much that they ended up actually moving into the Resch family home. Bill Roll was determined to get to the source of Christina's powers and later wrote that Christina had one of the most convincing cases of poltergeist activity he had ever seen. Desperate to not lose what he believed to be one of the biggest investigations of his life, Bill then invited Christina to come and live with him in his home in North Carolina. Christina was only 15 years old when Bill approached her with this proposition, and like any teenager, she was vulnerable and was having a hard time with her foster parents. My adoptive father had stopped speaking to me, and my adoptive mom and I argued all the time. Bill was like someone who was saving me from drowning in my own family, she later said, and she agreed to move in with Bill. There, Christina found herself at the center of attention once more. Bill first introduced her to Jeannie Lagle, a psychiatrist and hypnotherapist, and together they began to medically examine Christina, test her abilities, and took her to parapsychology conferences. But then the Resches asked Christina to come home. Christina agreed, but only for a moment. Shortly after arriving back at the Resch family home, and when Christina was only 16 years old, she met and married a man named James Bennett, someone she later described as a complete monster. James would beat Christina until she lost consciousness. He would often gag and rape her. Whenever Christina would try to run away, he would chase her down, beat her again, and threaten her life. At one point, he even burned all of her clothing in an attempt to make it impossible for her to leave him again. When Christina finally did manage to escape, James continuously stalked and harassed her. Understandably, all of this was too much for Christina to bear, and she became very ill. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, and when she couldn't even keep water down, she ended up going to the hospital. There, she was confronted with the startling news that would forever change the course of her life. The then 19-year-old Christina was told that she was pregnant. Others may have viewed this pregnancy as another hardship to contend with, especially considering who the child's father was and how they came to be. But to Christina, it was a blessing. She later said that finding out she was pregnant actually saved her life. She was no longer fighting to keep herself alive, but she was fighting for her child, and that made everything so much clearer. Christina was now determined to do better and be better so that her child wouldn't have to go through the same hardships that Christina had growing up. She got herself a job and a new place to live, and shortly after that, she welcomed her daughter, Amber Gail Bennett, into the world. Christina then met and married a man named Larry Boyer, but what had looked like a fresh start and a new hopeful beginning quickly turned sour. A familiar pattern began to emerge when Larry turned abusive. But this time, Christina didn't stick around long enough for things to get worse. When Larry was in jail one night, Christina packed up Amber and their things and moved to Carroll County, Georgia. It was a quiet and highly conservative town. The people there thought that Christina was a wayward sinner, or at the very least an incredibly unusual woman who'd shown up without her husband and with a team of parapsychologists hot on her tail. Bill Roll and Jeannie Lagle actually ended up following Christina to Carroll County, still determined to get to the bottom of this poltergeist activity that supposedly was still happening all around her. But Bill and Jeannie brought their own problems with them. Problems that Christina found herself caught in the middle of. Jeannie claimed to have been taking on most of the workload, while Bill hogged the limelight. He allegedly started going to parapsychology conferences without Jeannie, claiming all of the research and all of the evidence they had collected together was his own. But the final straw came when Jeannie found out that Bill had been writing a book about Christina behind her back, and it was after that Jeannie decided to take matters into her own hands. She approached Christina and struck up a deal where Jeannie could write her own book about Christina and their research, and Christina agreed to help her. In return, Jeannie paid Christina $5 per hour to type up her research notes, and the two of them got to work. The extra money helped Christina out around the house, and it was a house that now had more mouths to feed. Somewhere along the way, Christina had met David Heron, a man who also had a daughter the same age as Amber. When he and his child moved into Christina's trailer, they brought with them a fresh start and a new sense of opportunity. David could now look after the children, and Christina could pick up more hours working with Jeannie, both typing up her research notes and working on the book that they hoped to later sell. But there was still trouble on the horizon. Christina later said that she would often have to remind David that Amber was different from his own daughter. Amber was energetic, almost hyperactive, and often got herself hurt because of it. Amber would get the usual bumps and bruises that most toddlers do, but in the spring of 1992, she also took a dive out of the back of the car when she was overexcited about getting out of her car seat. Amber hit the pavement and ended up with a large swollen forehead that had Christina desperately calling her foster mother Joan for advice about. Joan told Christina that Amber was probably fine and to just keep an eye on the swelling and on her behavior. Christina breathed a sigh of relief and went about her days. As the swelling went down, she felt comfortable enough to leave Amber alone again with David and head out to work. But when she came home later that day, David was standing in the driveway. He told her that something was wrong with Amber and she wouldn't wake up. Christina rushed inside to find her daughter unconscious, her skin already turning a sickening shade of gray. By the time they reached the hospital, it was already too late for little Amber. Christina was distraught, but within moments, she was escorted down to the local police station, not to give a statement, but to be questioned about her daughter's death. It turned out that Amber's death had not been an accident, but a result of another blow to the head, a blow that was later determined to have happened while Amber was at work, and more than likely the result of a beating. The question that investigators put to Christina was if she'd known that David had been abusing her daughter or not. Christina denied everything and denied that David had ever hurt Amber. The authorities didn't believe her, and prosecutors later argued that if Christina had taken Amber to the hospital sooner, like when she first started showing signs of bruising, it was more than likely that Amber would still be alive. They said that Christina had a role to play in her daughter's death, one that revolved around protecting her daughter's abuser instead of her own child. The death penalty was now on the horizon for Christina. Not wanting to risk it, her lawyers advised her to take an offered plea. This is a plea that people can make where they plead guilty without actually saying they're guilty of the crimes they're being charged with. Essentially, they're saying that they're innocent, but they would rather go to prison than risk going to court, being found guilty, and sentenced to death. Christina was put away for life and is still behind bars to this day. David Heron was somehow found not guilty of murder, but was sentenced to 20 years for child cruelty. He was released in 2011. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to 10-Minute Murder. If you're a brand new listener, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now, because chances are that's where you'd like to listen to podcasts. And if you subscribe, you'll more easily be able to catch up on all of the back episodes and binge all of those. If you're an OG listener, back again for another episode. I love you with my whole heart, and I really appreciate you sharing the podcast with your friends and family. Go to the website, 10minutemurder.com. There you'll find all the things about the podcast. You can also email me, joe@10minutemurder.com. Follow the podcast on social media. You can go to the website. There are links there. You can go to the episode notes of this episode. There are links to follow on social media there. Or there's a secret third way, only for the very savvy social media users. You can just go to the search bar within any of those social media places, type in 10-Minute Murder, and the podcast is going to pop up. All right, that's going to do it. That's your episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.